Good morning, everybody. On this date, August 31, in 1935, Congress passed a Neutrality Act, the first of four that were passed in the 1930s to try to keep us from another world war. But eventually, Pearl Harbor happened, World War II began for the United States. This photograph of dead soldiers from World War I reminds us of how horrific World War I was, and in the 1920s and 30s, Americans were pretty disillusioned about that war. And this line of Germans at a bank during the Great Depression reminds us again of how tense things were in the world, and as Americans looked and saw fascist leaders and communist leaders in the 1920s and 30s, there was a sense of isolationism and just looking at our own issues. In 1934, Congress passed the Debt Default Act, which basically said to countries we had lent money to, we're not going to lend you any more unless you pay us back. And then you get this book, Merchants of Death, in the 1930s, which says basically World War I was all about profits for the arms manufacturers and the weapons industry. This led to the Nye Committee hearings, in which Senator Nye officially looked into that question. Was World War I really about profits? And this was very sensational, and it led to our event, which is Congress passed the first Neutrality Act August 31, 1935, and in this cartoon, Uncle Sam's beard prevents aid that will win. It's tied up, so to speak, with neutrality acts. And here's another Dr. Seuss cartoon in which aid to the Allies is sort of just going in circles because of the Neutrality Acts. So the Neutrality Acts, while they represented a feeling of isolation in our country, prevented us from helping people. And one of the themes of the Neutrality Acts was this: embargoing arms sales. So we were not going to sell weapons to any nation at war. And because of the Lusitania sinking during World War I, pictured here, we were not going to allow Americans to sail on any ships of nations at war. Well, in 1935, fascist Italy invaded Ethiopia, and we did nothing. And one result was that Ethiopia was captured and conquered by Italy. During the Spanish Civil War of 1936, Nazi Germany openly helped fascist Spain, but we officially did nothing to help Republican Spain, and Spain became fascist. And then also, when Japan invaded China, we officially sat on the sidelines while Japan rolled up China, at least along the coast. Well, by the time World War II began in Europe, here's a picture of German airplanes bombing Poland, we realized that neutrality and isolationism probably wasn't going to work in the long run. And here's a picture of the Dunkirk evacuation in the spring of 1940. And once Germany had defeated Britain and France, we realized we needed to step up. And here, in 1941, or late 1940, we actually gave Britain destroyers in return for some bases. So not an act of neutrality at all. And then in March of 1941, FDR signed the Lend-Lease Act, which basically gave aid to the Allies with very few strings attached. So that was a big change. In October of 1941, the Reuben James, pictured here, an American destroyer, was sunk by German U-boats. So more and more Americans are realizing World War II is probably going to come, and here it does, December 7, 1941, Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor, and all the talk of neutrality and all the talk of isolationism pretty much disappeared. So this map reminds us that when 1942 began, we were fighting two wars at once, against Germany and against Japan. No more isolationism.